puppies and kittens? Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And I see we open up the show with a new comment. This is from Luke Snyder, who says, "Who is Samuel, and why is this book titled with his name?"
Samuel is a prophet, and this is titled with his name because tradition.
Tradition!
I don't think you've watched our previous videos.
Also, yeah,
Lawrence,
obviously more in depth there.
Yeah.
Lawrence, you said you had a story that you
I do. This is very interesting. So, in my Greek course, we were talking about like before it started, we were talking about the use of AI, and Isaac, and possibly Tomer as well. Do you guys remember that guy who tried to use AI against me in an argument in the Discord? Do you guys remember that guy?
I think I was sleeping at that time.
Okay, yeah.
But
So
yeah,
I think he said-
remember.
I think he said the words, "Are you arguing with ChatGPT, or
Yeah,
do you,
something
do
like
you
that.
disagree with ChatGPT?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Yes.
It's actually ridiculous. Like, he was convinced that ChatGPT had all the fucking answers, and even when I could bring
Oh my
him the
God.
primary sources for what I was saying, he was like, "But ChatGPT says otherwise." And it was actually ridiculous. But either way, like I did a little rant about that at the beginning of class, and then after the class, my professor was like, "What kind of work do you do?" So then I started explaining the channel, the kind of stuff that I've done, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm been following that community kind of. He's a big fan of Bart Ehrman. In fact, he graduated from the same school and as Bart Ehrman, like as in like they went to school together. So the like he growing up in like a religious family, he kind of when he found his way out, it was the same way that a lot of us probably did. It was the four horsemen, right? It was Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, Dennett. It was Dillahunty. It was, and then he mentioned William Lane Craig, and he was like, "Who's that Craig guy?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, William Lane Craig." He's like, "Yeah, I fucking hate that guy." So, and I was like, "Do you know Arn Ra?" He's like, "Yeah, I've seen some of his videos." And then we started talking about like he watched like the debate on the historical Jesus between Robert Price and Bart Ehrman. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I was actually part of the team that set that up." And he was like, "Wait, really?" And so like it's actually kind of weird how we've been like in the same community, but like he's like kind of like he doesn't really engage with anything. He just kind of like watches it all from afar. Like he watches a lot of the people's shows, and he even watches Bart's podcast with Megan Lewis. So like he's very much aware of the community, but he's never like interacting with it. So like I had like a couple hour long conversation with this guy about like the changing face of like internet atheism. and then my work. So it was a very interesting conversation to have with a professor on those things.
Sweet.
That was my one. That was my one story. I just thought it was very interesting.
Imagine when you're the student, and he's following, but now, yeah, you have to. You're in that precious position where you have to precarious position where you have to guard your humility.
Well, the thing is, like I just want to make sure that he knew like for how long I have been doing this this kind of thing, like and like why I'm interested in like the field I'm interested in. So I was like I didn't like go over everything, right? Because that would have been a ton, but it was just something I was not expecting, honestly. Last semester I had him for a different course, and he basically quoted Bart Ehrman, and I clocked it as a Bart Ehrman quote in the back of my head. I was like, I know that's from Bart. And so I was going to talk to him afterwards about, on whether or not he was a fan of Bart Ehrman. And before I got a chance to do that, he starts talking about Bart and his work. So I was like, yeah, I could, clock that one. So it's just very interesting to have, and he's not really like an outspoken ally, but he is an ally in this, and it's just very interesting that he was, that he's a lot closer to the community than I would have suspected.
Nice. All right, so who is reading today, and what are we reading today?
Second Samuel
Nathan and
chapter.
David are having a conversation. Yeah, I mean, it's boring. But
Well,
as
thanks for that.
Lawrence
Yeah,
as
this
Lawrence
is-
said last week, it's one of the main things which lead to the Deuteronomistic history or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. This is the crux of the arguments, because it talks. This has like a prophecy about who's going to reign, and when it comes to who does in fact reign, it's kind of a different story, because while it says that like the seed of David will reign on the throne of Israel forever, now obviously it didn't turn out to be true, right? We all know how that ended, but the thing is, because of that, we have this debate that's been happening for a long time about when this portion was written, and it is the crux of it. So some people will say like, okay, well, this is obviously written beforehand, because they wouldn't have written it after a time where the seed of David wasn't on the throne of Israel. Some people, specifically Van Setters, dates it exilically, saying like this is very similar to literature that shows like a hope to a return and a kingship. And then some people date it afterwards to, not that many, but some people date it afterwards to kind of justify any upcoming reign. So now I personally am of the opinion this is a from a pre-exilic layer. And I think I mentioned this before. I've used the book before, certainly. So in Thomas Romer's The So-Called Deuteronomistic History, I don't know, Mark, do you have a copy of that on you? I know you recently picked it up. So it's a very good read, and he goes over some of these hypotheses in pretty decent detail.
There's that, which is really very important, but then there's a couple of passages or verses in this chapter that are later picked up centuries later by Christians and get reinterpreted and become part of the foundation for how they see and interpret Jesus as this fulfilled Messiah, and how they, in my opinion, have to kind of bend and twist what the Hebrew text is saying in order to make those connections. So I'm excited to hear some commentary from Tomer and some of these ancient Christian authors that may have said
Yeah,
stuff like that.
I will say that this chapter is the comments are short here because it was so boring for me that I just couldn't bother. The commentaries of McCarter, and then especially McCarter, are so long, and it was so technical that I didn't want to bore people. I mean, they already bored me with my commentaries, but I didn't want to bore them more than necessary. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the time for stuff like this specifically, you'll find that
You're
they
muted
just give
on.
you lists of verses, and it does get daunting to just kind of look at that. Like, you don't want to read all that out loud. God, that'd suck.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like how Tomer doesn't want to bore people more than necessary, but he hasn't established how much it is necessary to bore people. We have a comment from Herman Hinterhauser, who offers 4.2 euro. Says, will Samuel finally cite Ezekiel today?
Why? Because Ezekiel is later. What?
All right, who's reading?
I can, if I'm always
Yeah.
happy.
Okay. Mark,
Yeah.
take it away.
Read through 17.
Okay, perfect. The king settled into his palace, for the Lord gave him relief from all his enemies on all sides. The king said to Nathan the prophet, look, I'm living in a palace made from cedar, while the ark of God sits in the middle of a tent. Nathan replied to the king, You should go and do whatever you have in your mind, for the Lord is with you. That night, the Lord told Nathan, go tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Do you really intend to build a house for me to live in? I've not lived in a house from the time I brought up the Israelites up from Egypt to the present day. Instead, I was traveling with them and living in a tent. Wherever I moved among all the Israelites, I did not say to any of the leaders whom I appointed to care for my people Israel, why have you not built me a house made from cedar? So now say this to my servant David. This is what the Lord of hosts says. I took you from the pasture and from your work as a shepherd to make you a leader of my people Israel. I was with you wherever you went, and I defeated all your enemies before you. Now I will make you as famous as the great men of earth. I will establish a place for my people Israel and settle them there. They will live there and not be disturbed anymore. Violent men will not oppress them again as they did in the beginning and during the time when I appointed judges to lead my people Israel. Instead, I will give you relief from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that he himself will build a dynastic house for you. When the time comes for you to die, I will raise up your descendant, one of your own sons, to succeed you and will establish his kingdom. He will build a house for my name, and I will make his dynasty permanent. I will become his father, and he will become my son. When he sins, I will correct him with the rod of men, with wounds inflicted by human beings. But my loyal love will not be removed from him as I removed it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will stand before me permanently. Your dynasty will be permanent. And Nathan told these words to David that were revealed to him.
So, obviously, didn't work out. By the time you get to the Babylonian exile, sorry, not happening anymore. Like, yeah, they have some like puppet kings for a little bit, but who cares? So there are a lot of things going in the direction of divine legitimation. So, firstly, we have David, who he has like he's not just the he's not just supposed to be the political wing anymore. Then his progeny is supposed to take over the religious wing of society as well. So like this story already assumes Solomon, right? So we have the because Solomon is the one who, you know, he's David's son, and he's the one who does end up building the temple. And once we get to that, boy, does he make quite the large sacrifice. The idea here of divine legitimation pops up in a few ways, right? Because like Nathan said to the king, go do all that you have in mind, for the Lord is with you. So we already have seen references to the Lord being with David before, but now he's like, well, you can do whatever now because God's on your side. So you already have this divine legitimation. It's giving authority to the king to take over that religious realm. And like we have references to the fact that, you know, he was that God's that the Ark of the Covenant was always and that the presence of God therefore was always it was always moving around. So now we are centralizing worship. We are centralizing the kingship as well around David's lineage. So it's there are a lot of things in this passage that is written for divine legitimation. And for me, this being a pre-exilic work makes the most sense. Now it obviously be part of the same layer as the Solomon, as Solomon building the temple. It wouldn't make much sense if it wasn't. So I mean there where was it here? Yeah, especially here in what is it? So the 2 Samuel 7. Yeah, so starting at verse 12 all the way through, like it's or also verse 16. Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. This is just divine legitimation of the kingship, and through the building of the temple, it's going to be divine legitimation of the priesthood as well, and the connectedness of the priesthood and the kingship. And to me, this fits more in the schema of pre-exilic. Now, I've seen some arguments that this it's dated somewhere between the reigns of Hezekiah and Josiah, and those were like the two like good kings, the ones that are actually called good, and it would have been during those periods that something like this would have been written. So I've seen dating in between that period. So I'm not entirely certain. I've heard arguments in one way or in the other, but the I cannot see a reasonable route to even though Van Setters, who I fucking love, dates this exilically, saying this is just like a statement of hope, and it's very common in ancient Near Eastern writings, which he's not like it does pop up a few times, so he's not totally wrong or anything. But I just find it more likely to be before the exile for this layer.
I did want to say that there was a tradition kept through the exile of a Rosh Galuta, or like the leader of the exile, and he would have supposedly have been like a descendant of the king of the royal house. Also sometimes called the Nasi, but I think that was changed to become the president of the like the president of the Sanhedrin was called the Nasi. So that word kind of, I guess, stopped being used to mean prince or leader. And
Though
they
here
kept
it
like
is Nagid, not Nasi.
oh, sorry, what's the word?
Or Nagid here.
Nagid?
Or is that or is that a different thing you're talking about?
I don't. I'm trying to remember, but yeah, Rosh Galuta was definitely the more common term used in later writings as well. But there was a tradition of this is the male line descendant of King David, and the Persians saw it in some official capacity. I'm not sure. So it is possible, if they were like, oh yeah, we still have the line of David, we're going to go back, we're going to rebuild, blah, blah, blah. So maybe it's possible that this was written as a sort of, as like for hope for the future rather than as a legitimizing
Yes, it's
Josiah
certainly
or Hezekiah. But,
certainly possible, but
yeah, but I agree with you that it makes more sense to have been pre-exilic.
I also wanted to mention too that many of the tropes for this leader that's being legitimized, this divine sort of legitimacy to his kingship and therefore the dynasty, isn't something that was just original to the ancient Israelites. Like the Greco-Roman world is full of stories that do similar treatments of their heroes, ascribing them some sort of divine birthright to their crown and whatnot. Like they're not the only ones claiming some sort of sonship to their deity as part of their roots. So that doesn't necessarily discredit anything on the story itself, but it just goes to show you it's part of a similar part of the milieu of what's happening around the world with regards to these kingdoms that are forming and dissolving and etc.
Yeah, and like we did have the idea of David as we're gonna have it more, especially in the Psalms, the idea of David as God's son, and then he's gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna pass that title over to Solomon after he's dead. So more legitimation.
Should we read some comments?
Yeah.
All right. So Matt White says, Aaron, so David was real and fake stories got attached to it. This is your Jesus parallel for the week or for this week.
Oh God. Speaking of
Yeah.
Jesus.
And then Satan, what?
It says, just said, speaking of Jesus, the ancient Christians had a field day on this chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking forward to you reading that.
Yeah.
Satan 616 says, if David's blood legitimizes the future king / Messiah, how come Jesus is legitimized if Jesus wasn't his biological father?
Joseph.
Of Joseph.
Not
Joseph.
Jesus.
I'm sorry, Joseph, it wasn't his biological father. How would Christians insist on Jesus' descent from David?
Why?
So I think Mary is also supposed to be a descendant, right? If I
But
remember.
that doesn't make sense. That doesn't work from the Jewish perspective, or I mean, like the tribe affiliation. A king passes down through the son, not through the daughter. So like, even if Mary was from the tribe of Judah, if Joseph was the father of Jesus and he was from a different tribe, then Jesus would have been from that tribe, not from his mother's tribe.
Yeah.
Now, is it accurate to say, I've only heard this, that by the first century, maybe even prior to the first century, even the line of David had already been lost. Like there was not anyone that could actually claim, "Oh, I'm actually a descendant," and that much was subject to debate.
There's definitely a tradition that was kept alive of
But
people
like,
who.
because where's in like where the Hasmoneans were maybe the ones that were closest to,
Yeah, but the
but not
Hasmoneans
like
weren't
truly.
Judahites.
It could be like that. It actually stopped like a long time ago, like during even the days of the Judean kingdom, right? Just a second.
It's possible, but there was the tradition of being descended from the house of David was kept alive. There's still like, even in medieval times, there were people who claimed descent through specific people who everyone agrees was from the line of David, so that makes them from the line of David. A lot of like, I think the Maharal of Prague, for example, I think is supposed to be claimed descent from David, and there's a few others I don't remember. I'm not saying that they're right or that there is a good record. I don't think there's any good records for it, but there is definitely a tradition. So I would have thought that in the first, second century, there were still people who claimed descent, and the Maccabeans were Levites. They were priests, so they wouldn't have had any claim to the Davidic line, the Davidic throne.
Lilith Liberated adds that for the record, modern Christians will pretend one of the genealogies goes to Mary, but in fact, they both literally say Joseph.
Yeah, that's also true, and they also overlap in the middle. So even if they were talking about two different people at the bottom, you're not going to go different directions once you get to a known historical figure. You're going to follow the same line. It makes no sense for them to get to, who was it, Zerubbabel or whatever, and then go different lines to get back to David.
And I've also heard that it would be quite ignorant to claim tribal descendancy through the mom when traditionally that's only a father thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if they are, they're just ignorant, the New Testament authors.
Even like, you know,
they had to keep Jesus somehow in the family, right? But then they also, I mean, later theology would have a field day with the whole flesh part of it, right? Because like some of them would say, well, the flesh is the part that came from Mary, and the Logos was like this, a pre-existent being, and he just took flesh from Mary to become incarnated. So it still does have biological descendancy, but not quite in the same way.
And
but
also, by the way,
then that would mean that Jesus would inherit original sin, because Christians believe in original sin that would have come from mom. So we're gonna make an exception.
But there was also like in the I think it's the infancy gospel of James, where Mary is like super perfect. She was like kept away from the rest of society, and like she couldn't possibly sin. She was kept away.
She was born without sin is like a doctrine or something that Catholics don't believe in or something. I just want to say quickly that the Judaism like goes through the mother. That was something that was established later, and actually it would have gone through the father up until I don't know what point, but it would
Okay.
it changed at
Second
some point from the father to the mother. And the practical reason that's given is because like you always know who the mother of the baby is, you don't know who the father is. In certain cases, like the father could be unknown, so they changed it to.
So even worse, because it's during the first century that would never have passed. Like my mom is from this tribe, therefore I
think-
am.
I
Right?
think
No.
I think around the rebellion of Bar Kokhba, this changed to being the mother.
That makes sense. The status of being Jewish, not the status of your tribe. This tribe is still
Is
through
that
the father.
Jewish?
That-
Yeah,
that never
with
changed.
Yeah,
with the
because you can be adopted into a tribe. So,
Yeah.
so I guess theoretically you could say that Jesus is adopted by Joseph, and therefore he inherits his tribal affiliation, which does make sense. But I don't think that the throne would pass to him there though for adoption. Maybe, I don't know. That's probably a point they could argue on.
Okay, I think I should start my commentary. First, on verse 2, Nathan the prophet. Nathan is mentioned here for the first time. We do not know of his origin or any additional information about him. According to Chazal, in Talmud Bava Batra 15a, Nathan, alongside God, finished the book of Samuel after Samuel died. Bar-Efrat wrote that from his actions, in 12 verses 1 through 15 and 1 Kings 1, it seems that he was a court prophet. McCarter notes that scholars describe Nathan either as, quote, the witness to and guardian of a tradition that confronted and repudiated the Canaanite institutions, end quote, according to Krauss, or opposingly, as a spokesman for, quote, certain, probably Jebusite circles in Jerusalem, who sought to thwart David's plan to build a temple, end quote, according to Alstom. McCarter writes that in the present narrative, Nathan stands as, quote, the chief representative of the prophetic point of view with which the older materials have been editorially surcharged, end quote.
Wouldn't it just be an explanation of why David the Great didn't get around to building the temple? Why was it his son who did it? And it's like, oh, because God told him not to. Like, it's just an excuse. It's just an excuse, and the reasoning is that he wasn't as great as they say he was.
Yeah, they had to somehow move that from David to Solomon. So and I mean, later on, because of the importance of both David and Solomon in the religious sphere, this myth of a united monarchy came up later on. So
yeah, it's possible that they came from two different traditions, right? The House of David, House of Solomon were two different traditions, and then they were put together.
Well, the thing is,
and
it seems
Solomon's house is the temple, so it's like, yeah.
It seems like they are kind of linked, right? Because this already assumes the Solomonic stuff. But if we're talking about like even before that, maybe. But I don't think that there's enough preserve that would point to that direction.
Kind of reminds me of Christian theology. Oh, when Jesus said, if you destroy this temple, I will rebuild it in 3 days. Well, the temple did get destroyed, but never would rebuilt. Oh, it's because he meant his body, not the actual temple.
Oh yeah. Like then there, I think it was in one of the Pauline epistles. He's like, your body's a temple, or like Hebrews or something like that.
Yeah.
On that same verse, here I am living in a house of cedar while the ark of God remains in a tent. Although David doesn't explicitly say this, he orders to build a permanent house for God. Auld notes Michael Avios's opinion that the problem with David's proposal, from the perspective of ancient Near Eastern practices, is that there has been no prior divine injunction to build a temple. He writes, however, that David simply remarked on an imbalance of housing provision, and he did not make a proposal. Josephus, in Antiquity 790, wrote that David was afraid that he was committing an offense for living in a lofty house, while the Ark of God was lying in a tent. Tsumura writes that David's desire to build the temple is based on his current situation, where God gave him rest from all his enemies, and notes that in the ancient Near East, temples were usually built during times of peace and prosperity. On that same, sorry, not the same verse. On verse 4, that night, Rashi, based on Midrash Shmuel 26:1, writes, quote, Rabbi Hanina bar Papa said, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Nathan, quote, the man I am sending you to is a quick one. He may hire workers, and it will turn out that I cause him loss. Hurry and tell him it is not you who will build the temple, end quote. Rabbi Shimon said, quote, the man I am sending you to is a vow maker, end quote. As it is said, who has sworn to Adonai, vowed to the mighty one of Jacob, surely I will not enter the shelter of my house, in Psalms 132, verses 2 and 3. He may say, I will not eat, I will not drink until I do this, and it will turn out that I cause him loss. On verses 5 through 7, several commentators see these verses as a late addition, or at least not part of Nathan's original words. For example, Anderson writes that such an anti-temple sentiment is somewhat out of place during the monarchical period, since, quote, it is difficult to see how Yahweh's unqualified rejection of the temple could have been harmonized with his building, quote-unquote, of the Davidic dynasty, end quote. He suggested that verses 5 through 7 were originally written in the early exilic period, when the temple was destroyed. He writes that these verses, quote, would have served as an implicit explanation of the destruction of the house of Yahweh. It had never been required by Yahweh, and therefore it perished in the course of the people's punishment, like the temple of Shiloh, end quote. McCarter notes that while some expressions in these verses, like my servant Avdi and the day I brought up the Israelites, appear to be Deuteronomistic, they are not necessarily such. For example, the designation of kings and servants, quote-unquote, of the gods was widespread in the ancient Near East. On verse 8, ruler. Hebrew for ruler is nagid, also translated as leader or prince. The term is also used in 1 Samuel 9:16, 13:14, and 25:30. Tsumura notes that this is the last occurrence of the term in Samuel, and usually refers to the king designate or crown prince. McCarter comments, quote, it was characteristic of the prophetic school of thought from which this part of the oracle of Nathan probably derives to stress Yahweh's appointment of a future king as prince, quote-unquote, in affirmation of the divine prerogative of making and unmaking the leaders of Israel. The term Nagid does not appear in 1 Samuel 16 verses 1 through 13, to which the present verse refers, but it is used in allusions to David's appointment as princess, quote-unquote, twice elsewhere, once in an oracle uttered by Samuel condemning Saul in 1 Samuel 13:14, and once in an auspicious speech by Abigail in 1 Samuel 25:30. On verse 10,
verse are you up to?
sorry, 10,
Okay.
why?
No, I was just wondering if you're up to 12. Okay, keep going.
Okay. On verse 10, I will provide a place for my people Israel. Hebrew for place is makom. The exact meaning of a place for my people is unclear. This could refer to the land of Canaan, although the people are already in it. Kimchi, following the Targum, writes that this is a blessing that the land would be prosperous. McCarter, however, proposed that this is a place of worship, with makom being a Deuteronomistic expression for the chosen place of worship. He writes, therefore, that this phrase looks forward to the establishment of the sanctuary of Jerusalem. Anderson, however, writes that this connotation seems less suitable in the present context, and writes that the phrase describes the blessings already bestowed upon David because of Yahweh's active help. Likewise, Tsumura writes that verse 10 refers to the past actions of the Lord for his people. Citing D.F. Murray, he writes that this verse is not reminiscent of the Deuteronomic makom formula, and that the temple is never directly and uniquely identified in the Deuteronomistic allusions as the Deuteronomic makom. Murray follows Kimchi's interpretation that verse 10 affirms that Yahweh, quote, will transform that place of hazard into a place of safety, into a permanent haven of security for his people, end quote. Isaac, you can say what you want.
Oh, I was just gonna say no. Keep going. When I'll after you finish 12, I'll jump in.
I don't have 12. That's the point.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to bring back to something that Aaron brought up earlier about people using claiming prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament, and this is an example. So verses 12, 13, 14. It's talking about David's house being forever, and we were talking about how did that keep going and whatnot. So Christians claim that Jesus is fulfilling this somehow, because even though we don't know who comes from King David, Jesus lives forever, I guess, and therefore somehow that fulfills the seed. That David's seed will reign forever, and yeah, it's super.
And they
I think
have
there's
to
even like
rely,
the
I
son of
think.
God here as well. Yeah, he'll be a son to me, right?
And one of the things that I noticed is that they have to rely on stretching because the text beyond what could possibly mean. Because it says, I will raise up for you a descendant or a seed. That could imply that it's referring to one of King David's sons, a descendant. But since Jesus in Christianity happens like so many centuries later, they have to rely on the seed being something that could just a dynasty, just something that's way out there, but still part of your inherit, your family, but just not an immediate descendant,
Yeah,
right?
but it does use the language that kind of implies. I don't mean I don't mean your seed in general. I mean your son, the one you actually like. Well, I don't know what the word is, conceived, because it says what is it?
It says that
When
you're
you are done
offspring,
and
right?
you lie with your sons, your seed acharecha, which means after you, right? And like, why does it say your seed, the one that comes after you? And that implies direct descendant to me, but
Yeah, and it
if
says,
yeah.
"Who shall come forth from your body?"
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that too, especially.
Yeah, well, yeah, mimeecha,
Yeah.
like from
And
you. Yeah.
and I think the concept of being succeeded, it's making direct reference to the crown. Jesus was never king of anything, unless we're taking metaphors as.
Yeah, I think the Christians will argue about whether he was king or not. I mean, the Romans said he was king, so that makes him king.
That's something else that I wanted to do a video on messianic expectations, because I definitely hear quite a lot of apologetics, but I think that the idea where it's like, he's gonna make David's son, like God is gonna make David's son his own son. uh I I know that in later periods that would have confused the hell out of them when you have like Jesus as the son of God. It's like, in what way? So yeah, so now they're uh they're kind of taking it to be more than just biological offspring.
Yeah. I mean, if you read this normally with context, it's talking about Solomon. It's not that difficult. But if I can imagine that there were Jews in the second temple period that would have read into this messianic longing or whatever, and Christians would have just been part of that same tradition, and then as a reaction to Christianity, Judaism would have distanced itself from certain um, interpretations of parts of the Old Testament being referring to the Messiah, and only kept the bits that are very specific and also contradict the Jesus story.
Aaron, you want to make some comments?
So Matt White says, Isaac Raskin, the priests taking special care to maintain the bloodline of the house of David, like the Bene Gesserit did for Atreides in Dune.
Oh, did they? I don't think so. I think the priests themselves would have lost all their power during the exile period, and they would have tried very hard to keep their own bloodline long enough so that they could get back in control of the temple. But we don't know. I don't think we know if like the people that claim to be priests during the Second Temple period really were descended from original priests. Like, we don't know exactly how true they kept to the kept the line strong, but I think they wouldn't have bothered about the Davis line at all.
If it is really by a bloodline, then maybe it is like the Dune series. Anyway, SJL. I'm sorry.
Makes sense. Yeah, you're right.
SJL says, I seem to remember hearing that Mary's mother, Anne, birthed Mary via immaculate conception. That was the explanation for why Mary was sinless. Was this a Catholic thing, maybe?
So
Yeah.
maybe like potentially like early Catholic. So I forget if it was the Gospel of Mary or I think it was the proto or the infancy Gospel of James. I think that that talks about that. But yeah, it's an interesting
Yeah,
work.
apparently.
We do have a reading of
Yeah.
it on our channel, by the way.
The,
Yeah.
the
If you go to
relevancy of
Gospel-
that, the relevant, I'll say one thing. The relevancy of that Catholic doctrine of the Immaculate Conception is not that Jesus was conceived immaculate. It's that Mary was conceived immaculate because when the doctrine of original sin, which was invented by Christians much later than the New Testament context, was they thought it through. They're like, okay, wait a minute. If Jesus was born from Mary, that means that original sin must have been passed down to Jesus. So how do we bypass that? Well, let's just invent that Mary was conceived free from sin, meaning she did not inherit an original sin that would have been then passed down to Jesus. So let's come up with a lie, another lie to cover up another lie.
But what does it mean to
Christianity
be
is
born?
funny.
What does it mean? What does it mean immaculate conception?
Like
Oh,
the,
okay. So it just means born without sin. So like, and not just born, but like by the time she was like able to conceive, she was sinless. So that's why a lot of these stories do contain stuff about her basically just being hidden off in the temple for a while until it's time to have Jesus. So like she was like kept away from Joseph. She didn't even like I think in the infancy Gospel of James, she didn't even have like a period or something. Like it was like everything that could possibly cause sin was kept very far away from Mary.
This reminds me of learning that I don't know what period this actually happened in, or if it did, but in the Talmud it talks about how there was a time where they would keep children in like a special compound so that they could never become impure, and it was like on a platform, and then they would transport them on the really fat oxen, so that the oxen were so fat that none of the impurity on the ground could get to the child while they were being transported. I think also they had like a wooden board. And then they would get them to the water, they would draw the water, and then now the water is pure, and then they could use it as part of like the red heifer ritual or whatever. It's like very interesting idea of like this little compound of pure children kept away from any impurity.
Sorry, hold on. I gotta deal with these fucking cats.
they must have had to tie their hands behind their back.
Okay, I'll continue on verse 13. He 13, he is the one who will build a house for my name. Several commentators take this phrase to be a Deuteronomistic addition. McCarter writes that this phrase makes Yahweh's rejection of the temple in verses 5 to 7 seem incoherent, and that it is best explained as a Deuteronomistic interpolation identifying David's offspring, quote-unquote, originally conceived collectively as the temple builder. Anderson notes that house of my name, quote-unquote, is a Deuteronomistic expression found in 1 Kings 3:2, 5 verses 17 and 19, which is 3 and 5 in the Old Testament, and 8:18, and may denote a more abstract concept of God's presence. While his dwelling place is in heaven, according to Deuteronomy 4:36, 26:15, and Isaiah 63:15, he may be symbolically present through his name. And finally, on verse 14, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. This phrase is absent from 1 Chronicles 17:13. Anderson writes that the chronicler tends to see Nathan's oracle in the light of the ideal king, and thus he omitted this phrase. Auld comments, the statement about punishment is a plus in Samuel. The working is a mixture of Psalms 89:33 and possibly 2 Samuel 7:19. Punishment of perhaps only human proportions is perhaps to be contrasted with punishment on a divine scale. And yet David chooses divine afflictions for his people to suffer after he counts them. 2 Samuel 24 verses 13 and 14. Yeah. I think we should continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Me too.
Oh,
All right. Picking up on verse 18. King David went in, sat before the Lord, and said, "Who am I, O Lord God, and what is my family, that you have brought me to this point? And you didn't stop there. O Lord God, you've also spoken about the future of your servant's family. Is this your usual way of dealing with men? O Lord God, what more can David say to you? You've given your servant special recognition, O Lord God, for the sake of your promise and according to your purpose. You've done this great thing in order to reveal it to your servant. Therefore, you are great, O Lord God, for there is none like you. There is no God besides you. What we've heard is true. Who is like your people, Israel, a unique nation on the earth? Their God went to claim a nation for himself and to make a name for himself. You did great and awesome acts for your land before your people, whom you delivered for yourself from the Egyptian empire and its gods. You've made Israel your very own people for all time. You, O Lord, became their God. So now, O Lord God, make this promise you've made about your servant and his family a permanent reality. Do as you promised, so you may gain lasting fame, as people say, the Lord of hosts is God over Israel. The dynasty of your servant David will be established before you. For you, O Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, have told your servant, I will build you a dynastic house. That is why your servant has had the courage to pray this prayer to you. Now, O sovereign Lord, you are the true God. May your words prove to be true. You've made this good promise to your servant. Now, be willing to bless your servant's dynasty so that it may stand permanently before you. For you, O sovereign Lord, have spoken. By blessing, may your servant's dynasty be blessed on into the future.
Yeah, just further on or furthering that divine legitimation. Now directly being like, yes, please bless this house forever.
Such a boring
Didn't really
chapter.
work out that well.
no, didn't. Okay, I'll start on verses 18 through 29. Anderson notes the various opinions regarding the dating of the prayer. Some scholars, like Carlson, Cross, and Viola, argue that it was all Deuteronomistic, but others have argued that some portions of the text are Deuteronomistic, especially verses 22 through 26. For example, Mettingale sees verses 18 through 22 and 27-29 as belonging to, quote, a pre-Deuteronomistic stratum of the prophecy of Nathan, end quote. McCarter argued that the prayer, quote, in its primitive form was associated with the Ark ceremony in chapter 6 rather than the dynastic promise in chapter 7, end quote. Anderson concludes, quote, the exilic period would provide a good historical setting for this prayer, end quote, comparing it to Psalms 89 verses 47 to 52, which is 46 to 51 in the Old Testament, and with Ezekiel's frequent use of Lord Yahweh.
Also, I just want to point out in verse 18, it says that King David sat before the Lord, implying, like in front of the ark. And that doesn't, it wouldn't have made sense because you're not allowed to sit in the tabernacle or in the temple. So I think the rabbis were like, oh, okay, kings are allowed to sit in the temple.
Yeah, I mean, Arashi says before the ark, but I think Kimchi has quotes from Shochatov 1b. There is no sitting in the Ezra only for the kings of the house of David.
There's no sitting. Okay, yeah.
In
Except
the
for the
Ezra,
kings.
Yeah, you got to be
Yeah.
careful
Well-
about. Also got to be careful about peeing wherever the box can see you.
Exactly.
If also there was a, yeah, it would be really weird to say that, but we also have to remember that the idea of the ark, right? Because like he was, like, well, from these texts that we've read, like we have to remember that that all the ones we've read have been written quite a long time after the supposed period that they were in, right? So we have to remember that there are probably quite a lot of anachronisms, and the idea of so they already were like moving around the ark, right? Like David was already in front of the ark and whatnot, and I know that this is specifically like in a temple context. Or actually, hold on, what's the what verse did he say he was right in front of him? 18, you said?
Yeah, before Yahweh.
Oh yeah, and set before Yahweh. Yeah. So this is also so this is a time before the actual temple, right? So the temple has not been built. So I could like this would be like in my view, right? This would be a reference to the ark or the statue, right?
Yeah,
but
if it's in like a tent or something, that's equivalent to the tabernacle in the desert. Obviously, those aren't necessarily traditions that are chronologically in order, but according to the tradition that this is the same temple tabernacle system, it doesn't make sense for anyone to be sitting there, so they had to claim that the kings were allowed to.
Oh sure, yeah. Later projects there, but I would say like during this would make a lot more sense like before the time of before it got super aniconic, so before a time when they really became against like icons and like actual imagery of God.
Right.
So there's one part of this text that kind of makes reference to that later period, and that is the part where it describes the temple as a dwelling for the name of Yahweh, as opposed to what some other texts refer to as the presence. Doesn't that signify a change in like the belief system with regards to the temple that is a little later than earlier?
Maybe. And also like the language of speaking, like going in front of the Lord and sitting in front of the Lord and speaking to the Lord. That could be a hint of it being an earlier text rather than a later one where it would have been like in the presence or whatever.
Okay. On verse 19, this decree, sovereign Lord, is for a mere human. The Hebrew Bible reads, "This is the law of man." In Hebrew, Torat HaAdam, my Lord Yahweh. The exact meaning of this phrase is unclear. 1 Chronicles 17:17 reads, "You regard me as a man of distinction." In Hebrew, Ketor HaAdam HaMa'ala. Rashi wrote that this was a wonderment, with an addition to Rashi adding, "Is it fitting to announce such to mere flesh and blood?" Kara read Torah as Shura, which means row, i.e., God has placed David in the row of the great ones. Kimchi notes that according to Midrash Tehillim 1:2, the man of distinction was Moses, who was the greatest of the prophets. By parallel, David is the greatest of kings, and like Moses, who led Israel out of Egypt, so David led Israel out of enslavement by the kingdoms. Bar-Efrat writes that 1 Chronicles is attempting to interpret what is said in 2 Samuel. According to Anderson, most scholars take the Masoretic text reading as corrupt. He writes, quote, "The stability of the royal line is the will, Torah, of God, and it has implications for the whole mankind," end quote. McCarter, following Ewald and Wellhausen, amends the text to read, "And show me the generation," based on 1 Chronicles. While this reading is preferred by Auld, Anderson writes that this may not be be original to the text. Likewise, Tsumura writes that this emendation is not necessary, since the Hebrew makes good sense. He writes, quote, "David expresses his amazement at the Lord's special treatment of him and his house, i.e. his dynasty, even about the distant future," end quote. On verses 22 through 26, McCarter notes that these verses have a, quote, Deuteronomistic character, end quote, featuring many themes and cliches like "there is none like you" and "kamocha," your people Israel, Amcha Israel, to ransom or he ransomed, lifdot and pada, etc. He writes, quote, The Deuteronomistic character of verses 22 through 24 was recognized by Leonhard Rost. Noth believed they contained Deuteronomistic extensions, quote-unquote, and most subsequent scholars have agreed, contrast Herzberg and Seybold. McCarter has argued persuasively that the full extent of the insertion is verses 22b through 26, on the grounds that Deuteronomistic expressions occur in verse 25, as well as verses 22 to 24, and that the key clause beginning verse 27 was probably the original continuation of verse 22a, now continued by the key clause in verse 22b. On verse 23, this verse is difficult. McCarter notes that Robert H. Pfeiffer regarded this verse with its, quote, overtly confessional rhetoric and its troubled text as, quote, the worst instance of illiterate inanity, end quote, in the passage, quote. Yeah. Yeah. He writes, however, quote, while the Deuteronomistic author's theology is hardly subtle or gracefully expressed, the text it produced was not the perplexing clutter that Pfeiffer found in the received Hebrew text, end quote. Anderson writes that verse 23 is, quote, rather clumsy and may have undergone a textual corruption, although its essence is fairly clear. The counterpart of Yahweh's incomparableness is Israel's uniqueness. No other nation has such an awe-inspiring and mighty God, end quote. And finally, that's a short one, 25 through 27. Auld notes that the DJD, i.e. Discoveries of the Judean Desert, suspects that these verses in the Masoretic text have arisen either by accidental lithography or deliberate expansion of one or more of the divine epithets to conform with others. Now the Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we'll start with Cyprian, who writes that the denial of David's request points to the fact that it is Christ who is the true temple of God. Yeah. Tertullian, he writes that the
Just a
creator's...
question.
Sorry.
I know this maybe this is a bit much, but I just want to know, could you do like when you quote one of these people, could you say like when they were around, maybe like
Yeah.
like Tertullian, first century?
Yeah.
I don't
Cyprian
know.
was flourishing in 248 through 258.
And Tertullian
Lawrence,
was
you might-
around
That
during
specific.
he was mostly active in the early 3rd century.
Yeah. Lawrence, your mic is glitching.
Oh fuck.
Now Tertullian, who lived circa 155 through 225 C, writes that the Creator's promise regarding David's seed refers not to Solomon, but to the coming of Christ from Mary and the perpetuity of his kingdom. Yeah.
You know, one of the least crazy things Tertullian has said.
Yeah. Basil, who lived in the 4th century, writes that the tribe of Judah did not fail to continue until Christ, for whom the kingdom was reserved, came to rule in fulfillment of the Lord's promise to David.
Yeah, did not fail to continue is different than be on the throne forever.
Yeah, and also like the tribe of Judah is quite different from the line of David. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Afrahat, who lived in the 4th century, writes that as scripture records many instances of God calling Israel and Solomon my son, the title Son of God is rightly applied to Jesus. And finally, Justin Martyr, lived in the 2nd century, writes, for the unbelieving Jew, repentance is urged, since Jesus is shown to be the Messiah who was prophesied in the Old Testament.
Gosh, we've talked about this a lot today, and will in an upcoming episode.
Yeah.
There's one more trope that comes from this text that often gets highlighted in Christian commentators. Now, this is a more modern one. Joyce G. Baldwin and that's the description of David as the servant. It says here, my servant David is an honored title, but at the same time, a reminder to David that though he's a king and surrounded by those who serve him.
Mark,
Wait, Mark. Yeah,
you've gone underwater. Try again.
yeah. StreamYard.
But just try again. I think sometimes
Yeah,
it
try.
just.
Wait.
Oh,
You restarted, I think.
yeah. Refreshed. I think when
Yeah,
that
it's
happens, if
refreshed.
you just stop talking for a second, it
Yeah.
resets.
It like resets the noise gate or something.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
I don't know if we should continue. We should wait him or we just
Well, do
continue?
you have any more?
Oh, yeah,
any
he's
more
here,
No,
he's
erase,
coming.
erase. No, I have no comment.
Okay. I'm sorry, guys. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think you needed to refresh. I think if you just, when that happens, if you just stop talking for a second and then start again, it resets your voice.
Oh, okay.
Again.
Another option is to uncheck the background noise removal in StreamYard, and that might do the trick too.
All right. So are we ready now for 2 Samuel 8?
Not quite. I think Mark still
Well, I
had.
think
some
Mark-
yeah.
Mark had a
thing.
thing to say.
Mark wanted to finish
Uh,
it, yeah.
Yeah, so the highlight is, it is worth pondering that it was by servant imagery that the role of Jesus was most profoundly foreshadowed in the Old Testament.
Yeah, Isaiah especially, right? The suffering
Yeah.
servant imagery that's used a lot. So I
That's
actually,
definitely an example of like self-fulfillment, right? They
Yeah,
chose
they're
that
literally writing it in.
theme. They chose the theme of a suffering servant as part of the story. Maybe if Jesus was real and he was killed, it made them think about it. So
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
that like his life actually influenced the rest of the stories of like, oh, he was killed. How do we explain that? Oh, okay, he's gonna come back. He was a suffering servant. His things about that, and then we can write into that. But
Yeah. I think it's actually interesting how often Isaiah is used in the New Testament. I have a book that's just about like all the ways Isaiah was used in the New Testament, like in every single book.
yeah, makes sense. I think he was also very popular with the Essenes. I wonder if that was.
Oh,
if there's a
sure, yeah.
connection there.
And how many Isaiahs were there?
3, yeah.
Okay.
But they're not the same author, right? Is it
No.
No.
So like the first one, it some of it may have been from in the actual Isaiah, right? But when it comes to like the compilation of texts, like we have the very earliest strand, which this is all general, right? So they're generally speaking, we have first Isaiah, and then another iteration, second Isaiah, and then third Isaiah, and those are all like
They're
different.
like the same story, but like written differently.
Well, the thing is, they're all they're all in the book of Isaiah. So you have the book of Isaiah,
Okay.
but scholars have, like, as I said, first
Divided
Isaiah, second, third.
Okay,
Yeah.
based on what the author style is. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and not just as a style, even who they're talking about, right? Because sometimes, like even like the servant language, sometimes the servant is Cyrus. Sometimes the servant is Isaiah himself. Sometimes, and then you have this idea of the suffering servant being. There's a lot. I have a video about the suffering servant.
I was just about to say, wouldn't it be nice if somebody made a video about the suffering servant?
Yeah, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, go check out Lawrence's video on the suffering servant.
I do take up I do have a minority position on that. So, usually it's interpreted to be like Israel, right? My position is slightly different. Mine is that it is an idealistic view of a perfect follower. So like you are a better follower if you like suffer and die for the faith and stuff. And like Klaus Bolzer, for example, like for all the great commentaries that Hermenia has, Klaus Bolzer, I feel like he's too streamlined because his conclusion is that Moses is the suffering servant. And the thing is, he does draw a lot of verbal parallels between the servant language and the stuff that's used about Moses. And like a thing to me, that's not really an accident, right? Because they always tried to emulate their heroes. So like that is explained through that mode. But he's like, no, there was like one Talmud that said it was Moses, and I think that guy was right. So that's Baltzer's argument, and I think it's too tunnel visioned. But either way, I go over these things. And
also, an opinion in the Talmud is like could be the majority opinion, could be the minority opinion.
Right?
Like,
Yeah.
You know, they all opinions are mentioned at the same time. So
Okay, I think we should move
devil's
on.
advocate.
Are we ready for
Is there any
2
more?
Samuel 8 now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometime afterward, David attacked the Philistines and subdued them. David took Methegama out of the hand of the Philistines. He also defeated the Moabites and, making them lie down on the ground, measured them off with a cord. He measured 2 lengths of a cord for those who were to be put to death and 1 length for those who were to be spared. And the Moabites became servants to David and brought tribute. David also struck down the king of Zoban, Hadadezer, son of Rehob, and he went on to restore his monument to the river Euphrates. David took from him 1,700 horsemen and 20,000 foot soldiers. David hamstrung all the chariot horses, but left enough for 100 chariots. Hamstringing horses.
We've seen that before.
Yeah, I know. It's just inexcusable cruelty.
Well, for them, it wasn't.
No, the horses probably disagreed.
Yeah.
Who gives
Yeah,
a
I'm going
fuck?
to side with the horses. It's a minority opinion,
Minority opinion.
but
Yeah.
I'm going to side with the
Horse-
horses here.
Horses didn't get souls until the 1400s. So.
When the
Uh-huh.
Arameans of Damascus came to help King Hadadezer of Zobah, David killed 22,000 men of the Arameans. Then David put garrisons among the Arameans of Damascus, and the Arameans became servants to servants to David, and brought tribute. The Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. David took the gold shields that were carried by the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From Beta and from Baratai, towns of Hadadezer, King David took a great amount of bronze. When King Toi of Hamath heard that David had defeated the whole army of Hadadezer, Toi sent his son Joram to King David to greet him and to congratulate him because he had fought against Hadadezer and defeated him. Now Hadadezer had often been at war with Toi. Joram brought with him articles of silver, gold, and bronze. These also King David dedicated to the Lord, together with the silver and gold that he dedicated from all the nations he subdued from Edom, Moab, the Amorites, the Philistines, the Amalek, and from the spoil of King Zobah, Hadadezer, son of Rehob. David won a name for himself. When he returned, he killed 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt. He put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom, he put garrisons. And all the Edomites became David's servants. And the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and equity to his people while hamstringing their horses. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Zedek, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiatar, were priests. Seraiah was secretary, and Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, sorry, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were priests.
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
This chapter
David's
is a
sons
lot more
couldn't be
ambiguous.
priests.
Yeah. There's a lot of like not ambiguity, but like it's a bit more messy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this chapter is a lot. There's a lot to dig in. I have 8 pages on that.
Yeah.
It
Also,
shoves in a lot of wars. And like in the other narratives we got about David, right? It was very very pointed, against there was the one against Gibeon, there was the one against the what are they called? What was Goliath from Gath, right?
Gath.
So like mostly against the Philistines. That was like the crux of everything before. And it was, it kind of went into detail. These are just like, here's another war, here's another war, here's some offices, stuff like that. Now it does go it does take up another theme of divine legitimation, but in context, it is kind of weird because while it says that David made a name for himself, he already made a name for himself. This just kind of ramps it up around the rest of the place, and it kind of shoves in all these people together, right? Like Edom, Moab, Ammonites, Philistines, all those guys. So so there's already a lot of this might be like a kind of it's for me it's hard to tell if this is this might be a later passage, but it is kind of hard to tell because there would be no purpose in saying that he made a name for himself if he had already kind of had the name for himself and already had that divine legitimation. Although because it's so concentrated about war and less about the detailed stories and lessons from these wars, this might be just indicative of original David stories just being him as a warlord, which considering a pre-exilic context would kind of make sense of his sons being priests if we view the specifically like the Levitical priesthood as being a later invention. But I'm not sure.
The Targums translate it as ministers or important people, prominent leaders.
I mean, is this the same word that's used for priest in
Rav Ravin? It uses Rav Ravin. Which I can check.
That's just Aramaic for great people.
Yeah, if correct.
Yeah.
Oh, it says here that so if correct, the textual evidence is unclear. Yeah, membership in the priesthood was not limited to Levites in the time of David. Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean,
But the Hebrew word is identical.
Okay.
Kohanim, yeah.
Yeah, it's just it would have been later translators or commentators who are this can't be literally priests. It must be something else. Also, I was just question is I don't know how is it Zadok in English? Zadok the priest or Zadok?
Zadok, yeah, like the Zadokites.
Zadok. This is Zadok the priest of the song.
If you want to be more
the song is named after
Egyptian-y. Huh?
Is this the same Zadok the priest that the song is named after?
I mean, it would
What
make sense,
song?
right? Because it says that the Zadok son of Ahitub and Ahimelech son of Abiathar were priests. Yeah, because this was actually a big thing, right? There was that kind of what's the word I'm looking for? This kind of internal struggle between two groups of the priesthood. One being the Zadokites, who I think ended up they ended up winning, didn't they?
I think so. I mean, there's also the Sadducees. Is in Hebrew is I think it's Sadokim. I think it's the Zadok. Sadducees is named after
okay.
that priesthood, I think, and maybe not the same Zadok, maybe a later one then.
It actually is interesting that both the sons of Zadok and Ahimelech were priests, but then also the sons of David were priests. That is interesting.
Yeah, it's confusing. Interestingly, it says Ahimelech son of Aviathar. Is this the son of Aviathar who's named after his grandfather, or is this a mistake and it should be read the other way around?
Yeah,
son
there
of
is also
Ahimelech.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot.
There is
a lot. Yeah. I mean, I have, as I said, I have comments on this. Like a page and a half for this verse 17.
God.
Yeah. I mean, his father was killed, right?
There actually is a note on this. So two high priests served simultaneously during David's reign. One was Zadok, who survived Solomon's purge and became the ancestor of the dominant priestly family in Jerusalem. The other was not. Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, but Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, as shown clearly by 2 Samuel 15:24, 29, 35, also 17:15. The mistake in the present passage is replicated in 1 Chronicles 18:16, but not in 2 Samuel 20:25. Abiathar, the only survival of Saul's massacre of the Shilonite priesthood, became David's personal priest and remained at court until he was banished by Solomon for having sided against his succession.
So he wasn't. He didn't have a son who was a priest. Okay, so it wasn't. This is a mistake. It should say Aviatar, son of Achimelech. Okay, interesting.
Okay, I think I should
See?
start.
The text is not infallible, people.
Shocker.
Okay, I'll start on verse 1, Meteg ha'ama. The exact meaning of Meteg ha'ama is unclear. The word meteg has been variously understood as bridle or brittle, according to BDB Dictionary, Vulgate, McCarter. Yeah, Isaac, please correct me.
It's bridles, yeah.
Thank you. BDB Dictionary, Vulgate, McCarter, and Auld. Stick, according to Rashi and Kara, or reins, according to Hertzberg and Anderson. The word ama has been rendered as forearm by Hertzberg and Anderson, water canal by Kimchi, tribute by Vulgate, or mother city by Auld and Bar-Efrat. Septuagint reads, David took what had been marked off out of the hands of the Alophiles, i.e. Philistines, end quote. Targum reads, the arrangement of the cubit. Van Staldan Solman explains that Targum takes meteg as a metaphor for management, and the arrangement of the cubit might be a mathematical figure, referring to the technical superiority of the Philistines. According to 1 Chronicles 18:1, David took Gath and its dependencies. This led most traditional commentators to identify Meteg ha'ama with Gath. Rashi explains that Gath was, quote, the stick that dominated all the Philistine, and it was the king's metropolis, end quote. Peshitta reads Ramath Gamma, possibly conflicting the two names. Bar-Efrat, however, suggested that Meteg ha'ama was a certain object whose exact nature is unclear, that was part of the spoil.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, we're not sure if it's a place name, or if it's just like an actual royal scepter or something, maybe.
Yeah.
Or I mean, I think the Egyptian kings were shown to have reins or like a royal whip, sort of thing, or flogger, whatever. I don't know what
Flogger. Oh, this is neat. What's that? It's a flogger.
It's the royal flogger.
Yeah.
I think that would
Okay.
be more the person who uses the implement.
The way you said that reminded me of my first time at the London alternative market. What's this? Oh, that's a flogger.
Okay.
You guys are weird. On verse 2, on verse 2, the method described in this verse is not found anywhere else in the Bible, nor in extra-biblical sources. Anderson notes that David's harsh treatment of the Moabites is unexpected, given that Ruth, his grandmother, was also a Moabite. Moreover, the Moabites were helpful of David's parents during their enforced exile in 1 Samuel 23, 3-4. Traditional commentators, based on Tanchuma Buver Vayera 25, wrote that David had done this because the Moabite king killed his father, his mother, and his brothers, whom David left in Moab when he escaped Saul. And when David left to the forest of Charet, the Moabite king killed his family, except for one who escaped.
Wait, what? Wait, are you sure that's not for the next chapter?
No.
Which
Read
verse are you
Rashi.
reading?
2.
On verse. Which verse are you reading?
2.
2?
Yes.
Yeah, he also defeated the Moabites and making them lie down on the ground, measured them off with a cord.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This was revenge. Oh, I see. And then the next chapter, they go into more detail.
Yeah.
And he explains
Yeah,
it
yeah.
more. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, the cord thing is like he made them lie on the ground and ran a cord alongside them, and the soldiers lying next to the first two cords length were killed in the third, and then there was enough soldiers left over for one more cord who were spared.
Which is the weirdest way of counting prisoners.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I want to execute 2/3. Okay, make them lie down. I'm going to measure out like 3 chords. Yeah.
Divine wisdom.
Septuagint reads, there were the 2 portions for putting to death, and the 2 portions he kept alive. So it's not 1 and 2, it's 2 and 2. And Vulgate reads, he measured with 2 lines, 1 to put to death and 1 to save alive. 1 Chronicles 18:2 does not mention this event. And Auld writes, By adding it to this report, the author of Samuel reinforces what has just been noted about making kneel, quote unquote, being something Yahweh normally does. Giving David the decision over life and death creates an ironic echo of the credo, quote unquote, at the core of the Song of Hannah in 1 Samuel 2:6, where Yahweh is said to be the one who causes death and life. On verse 3, Hadad-ezer, son of Rechov. Tsumura comments, Hadad-ezer, son of Rechov, was the leader of the Aramean coalition that opposed David, according to 10:16. The phrase son of Rechov has been taken as evidence that Sova was ruled by a dynasty from Bet Rechob. Malamat suggests that possibly Hadad-ezer ruled first in Bet Rechob and then combined it with Sova. He seems to have had enough influence to draw together Arameans even from beyond the river. Though his name does not appear in contemporary extra-biblical materials, quote, he has been provisionally identified with an unnamed Aramean king, mentioned in Assyrian annals as having conquered certain territories on the upper Euphrates, south of Chalchemish, in the time of the Assyrian monarch Ashurabi II, a contemporary of David, end quote.
Also, his name is spelled differently in some places, right? Sometimes it's Hadar.
Hadad?
Oh yeah.
No, it's a different
sometimes
name.
written Hadar.
Hadar Ezer?
I mean, it'll make more sense if it was Hadad Ezer.
No, I don't see it.
No, okay.
No,
I think
maybe.
saw
I
something
mean,
about
the Targum Jonathan.
No, it could be like certain manuscripts have written Hadar instead of Hadad or something.
I mean, the
Or
Targum.
mistake.
Targum
yeah?
has Hadar Ezer. Yeah,
Oh,
Targum
okay.
has it. It's on 2 Samuel 10:19.
Okay.
Okay, on that same verse, to restore his monument at the Euphrates. It is not clear if the subject of this phrase is David or Hadad-ezer. Most traditional commentators take the subject to be Hadad-ezer. Bar-Efrat writes that this interpretation is more likely, since Hadad-ezer's influence has reached beyond the Euphrates River. McCarter, however, wrote that if this was the case, he would hardly have encountered David on the way, since Israel was south of Tsoba and the Euphrates north. He suggested instead that David marched to the Euphrates to leave a monument for himself. Anderson, however, writes that the former alternative is more likely, given the doubts expressed regarding the size of David's kingdom. Likewise, Tsumura writes that the text does not suggest that Hadad-ezer had encountered, quote-unquote, David on the way, but rather David took the initiative and went and defeated Hadad-ezer.
Maybe he was expanding out east, and then David attacked him on the west side, and defeated him.
And I have an optional here. The Ketiv here in that verse has in the river, Nahar, but the Kere has in the river Euphrates, literally Binahar Prat. Although both terms refer to the Euphrates River and is rendered as such by early translations, McCarter notes that some suggested a different river, either the Yarmouk, according to de Groot and van der Born, or the Jordan. Anderson notes Bud's opinion that the addition of Euphrates is unnecessary. Auld writes that if Euphrates has been deliberately deleted from the text, it could have been in order to favor David as claiming authority near some unspecified river close to Jerusalem.
Oh, so the idea is that they probably removed the name Euphrates rather than added it?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Now in verse 4, 7,000 charioteers. Sorry. Masoretic text attests to 1,700 charioteers. Although the Masoretic text reading is preserved by Targum, Peshitta, and Vulgate, 1 Chronicles 18:4 reads, 1,000 chariots and 7,000 charioteers. This reading is attested by Septuagint, Josephus in Antiquity 799, and 4 Samuel A. Kimchi wrote that here David counted the great officers in Hadad-ezer's camp, whereas in 1 Chronicles he counted all the chariots and the horsemen. Similarly, he doesn't mention the number of chariots, whereas in 1 Chronicles he does. Most commentators amend the text based on 1 Chronicles 18:4 and take the Masoretic text reading to be a case of haplography. Tsumura notes Ab Thomas's opinion that the original figures were 1,000 chariots, 700 cavalrymen, and 20,000 foot soldiers, which he takes as more reasonable, quote-unquote. He adds that parashim, usually translated to charioteers, can also refer to a horse and rider as a pair, and the term for chariot, harechev, must refer to chariot horses, since most were hamstrung. Thus, quote, David probably kept the 1,700 riding horses and 100 of the chariot horses unstrung, for cavalry would be useful in a mountainous area like Judah, while chariots would not, end quote. Yeah. On that same verse, he hamstrung all but 100 of the chariot horses. Anderson notes that while today we regard hamstringing of horses as, quote, an extreme cruelty to the animals, end quote.
That's kind of what I said, isn't it?
In the ancient world, it was, quote, an accepted military practice, end quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Just like child sex trafficking was a.
Yeah, I think it's if you kill the soldiers and you capture the horses, if you can't feed all of the horses and keep them, you're not going to release them into the wild, so they would hamstring.
Well, since horses are valuable animals, why did David hamstring them? Traditional commentators wrote that David fulfilled Deuteronomy 17:16, he shall not keep many horses. McCarter notes Bright's opinion that, quote, Israelite armies in the past had not used the chariot, and they still fought mainly on foot, end quote. And that of Yadin, that David's troops did use chariots, but, quote, they already had an almost full complement of horses, and having taken the few they could use, destroyed the rest as a precaution against their falling into enemy hands, end quote. However, based on Joshua 11 verses 6 through 9, he writes, quote, McCarter writes, in both passages, the hamstrung horses are captured from mercenary enemies. It may be that a special code of punishment applied in such cases, as in the case, for example, of covenant violations. The fact that in the Joshua passage the hamstringing of the horses is divinely commanded, in verse 6, reinforces the possibility that some special code, ritually sanctioned, is being applied. Quote.
So I do want to point out that throughout the Hebrew Bible, there is there's a whole lot of antagonism towards horsemen and chariotry in general. This was one of the ways that they differentiated themselves from the other places around them. Like there's the passage about, hey, don't get horses from Egypt and stuff like that. And of course, then I think it's I'm not sure if it's the same verse you mentioned, but I think there's one in Joshua about the iron chariots. So there is a stigma against using horses and chariots. Now I actually have a video on this one as well. It's called Heavenly Horseman. So the idea was that God had his own cavalry. So we're gonna see this later in some of the visions. I think it's is it Elijah or Elisha? I forget which one has this vision. But he looks out of this window and he sees all of God's chariots, like all in the sky. So it's like, well, we don't need those. We don't need horsemen because God has his own army, and it's way better than all the other horsemen and cavalry that these opposing armies have. So that's the crux of the idea. If you want to learn more, go see that video.
I think what it is, it's PTSD from the Exodus, man. Think about it.
Must be.
You want to read it? There is a comment, Orange. Maybe you want to read it?
Yep. So Matt White says, excuse me, at Isaac Raskin, at the coronation of Charles III, they played Zadok the priest, and priests from many denominations wanted to take part of that ceremony to legitimize their particular sect.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, the Zadok the priest is like a traditional song by coronations. I think it goes back to like George II or something. And so I wonder if like, because as he said, like legitimizing their priesthood, like, oh, like if we put some oil on his chest or whatever they do behind the curtain, then like that makes our denomination like more legitimate because of the Zadok the priest's line or something. I don't know. Sounds silly.
I also think about the Akitu festival too, right? Where the king in Babylon would, on that festival be faced. There's a whole procession and the whole thing with the priest slaps him on the face or something. And it's sort of like making that connection back to, you know, the king's connection with the god Marduk, and how it just gets legitimized that way as well.
Yeah, I guess it goes back quite far, this idea.
Okay, on verse 6, garrisons. In Hebrew, nitzivim, sorry. The word can denote garrisons, according to most of the translations, Josephus in Antiquity 7:104, most modern commentators. Or governors, according to Targum, Kara, Gersonides, Litrani, and Bar-Efrat. Anderson writes that the reading of garrisons is preferable, since it would include a military commander responsible for a particular area. On verse 7, David brought them to Jerusalem. Septuagint has the following plus, quote, David brought them to Jerusalem, and Sausakim, i.e. Shoshenk, king of Egypt, took them when he went up to Jerusalem in the days of Rehoboam, son of Solomon, end quote. This reading is also found in 4Q Samuel A and Josephus in Antiquity 7:105. McCarter writes that although it is possible that this notice has been lost from the Masoretic text, it seems more likely that the shorter Masoretic text, quote, stands closer to the primitive situation, end quote. He also notes that there is, quote, considerable evidence of a tendency towards conflation of the present passage and 1 Kings 14:26, end quote. Likewise, Anderson and Tsumura favor the Masoretic text.
Yeah, Shoshank, I think, is in Hebrew Bible called Shishak. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's one of the few. I think he's one of the like 3 real Egyptian pharaohs that are mentioned in the Bible in later books. Yeah.
And when do we hear about his redemption? Sorry.
Much later books.
Okay. On verse 8, Tebach. The Hebrew Bible reads Betach. 1 Chronicles 18:8 reads Tivchat. Kimchi suggested that both names attest to the same city. While the reading Betach is attested by Vulgate, which reads Bete, and Targum, Peshitta and Lucerne Recension read Tevach, a reading favored by most modern commentators. McCarter notes that according to Genesis 22:24, Tevach was the name of the son of Nahor, Abraham's brother. Anderson notes that the name also appears in ancient Near Eastern texts and was located in the anti-Lebanon region. Tsumura suggested that Tebach is a metathesis of the original form Bitech, or Bitch, of the Segolate Betach.
Oh, okay.
On Berothai, 1 Chronicles 18:18 has Kun. Very different. Ezekiel 47:16 has Berotah. Anderson writes that Kun and Berothai were not identical, although roughly in the same area. McCarter takes modern Bereitan, few miles south of Ras Baalbek, which is Kun, to be biblical Berothai, and writes that Tebach, Berothai, and Kun were principal cities of the kingdom of Tsoba.
Which is somewhere in Syria, right?
Ras Baalbek, I think it's Lebanon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know that there's Baalbek in Lebanon, so I guess.
Okay, right. The Arameans would have been in Syria. Okay. So it doesn't actually say. He just says he's the king of Soba. It doesn't actually like give him a tribe affiliation, right? It doesn't say whether he's a Canaanite or an Aramean or something.
No, it doesn't. On verse 9, Toy, king of Hamat. Sorry, McCarter comments. The city of Hamat, which lay on the middle Orontes, modern Hama, was the capital of a Neo-Hittite state that bordered Soba on the north. Compare 1 Chronicles 18:3. The king's name given here, Toi, is probably a hyperacrostic form of a longer name containing the common Hurrian element Tagi or Tegi, known from syllabic Tachi and Techi and alphabetic Tag or Taj, cuneiform texts. His son's name, however, is Semitic, Yoram.
Yeah. Okay,
now,
so Hama is a real place in Syria, north of Lebanon, north of Homs. There's a real place called Hama.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Location-wise, it makes sense. Yeah.
Now in verse 10 about Yoram, First Chronicles 18:10 calls him Hadoram, meaning Hadu is exalted, a reading reflected by Septuagint and Josephus in Antiquity 7:107. Bar-Efrat writes that Hadoram is a Canaanite name and Yoram is a Hebrew form of that name. McCarter notes that while many commentators restore his name, Manamat argued that Hadoram took the second Yahwistic name Yoram, Yahweh is exalted, to indicate his loyalty to David.
Kind of makes sense.
On verse 12, Edom, the Masoretic text has Aram. This meaning is attested by Targum and by Vulgate and KJV, which reads Syria. First Chronicles 18:12 and most early translations read Edom, a reading preferred by most modern commentators, considering verse 13. Auld notes that because of the similarity of Hebrew Dalet and Resh, confusion between Aram and Edom is widespread in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, I was going to say there's, like, I think it's verse 12 over here. I've got the Hebrew says from Aram and the English says Edom. Verse 14 is Edom in both. I think there was one other place, I think, where the Hebrew said Aram and the English said Edom. And I was like, I don't know. It's interesting why they changed it.
Yeah, I think I was considering verse 14 there. Yeah. Okay. Now in verse 15, doing what was just and right for all his people. Anderson comments, David is presented as the ideal king. Compare Isaiah 9:6, which is 7 in the Old Testament, Jeremiah 22:3 and 23:5, whose reign reflects the characteristics of Yahweh's rule. Seen Psalms 89:15, which is 14 in the Old Testament, and who maintains the well-being of his people. Herzberg is of the opinion that David, quote, took over the supreme office of judge, end quote. It is no doubt true that the king exercised judicial functions, but this does not imply that he replaced the existing legal administration. The changes provided an additional tier which functioned within the previous judicial framework. On verse 16, recorder, in Hebrew maskil. Early translations render recorder, i.e. the one in charge of public records. McCarter, however, compared it with the Egyptian office of vehamu, or speaker, whose duty it was to make reports to the king and transmit royal decrees. Tsumura, however, notes that Benjamin Mazar and several Egyptologists, like Kitchen and Redford, reject this equation. He writes, quote, as Scott C. Layton notes, every royal court had similar officials, and hence no direct dependence should be assumed between these two terms. Mazar has suggested that David was influenced by the long history of Jerusalem as an independent city-state, and must have learned from it and other conquered city-states about civil administrative systems. The recent discovery outside Jerusalem's old city wall of an Akkadian administrative tablet fragment with similarities to the Amarna letters would support the contention that in the 14th century BCE, Jerusalem had royal archives and hence a late Bronze Age civil administrative system. Technical terms such as recorder and scribe were probably derived from earlier Canaanite terms.
Yeah, Steinsaltz translates it as a chancellor, who would present to the king the pressing issues that required his decisions.
Yeah.
And scribe as being someone whose job was to write, like some sort of foreign minister who would write letters in different languages in the king's name.
There is a reading in the Targum that is I was appointed over the record. Okay, so on verse 17, Achimelech, son of Abiathar. This reading is attested by most early translations. However, according to 2 Samuel 20:25, Abiathar was a priest, while Achimelech was Abiathar's father, as we see in 1 Samuel 22:20, 23:6, and 37. This led several commentators to amend the text to read Abiathar, son of Achimelech, a reading found in Peshitta. McCarter notes that Wellhausen assumed that Achitub was the grandson of Eli, mentioned in 1 Samuel 14:3, and argued that Zadok could not be his son, since no Elite but Abiathar escaped the massacre at Nob. Thus, he concluded that the original reading of the passage was Abiathar son of Achimelech, son of Achitub, and Tzadok. While this reading was widely followed by many commentators, Cross rejected this reading since it assumes that Achitub must be a descendant of Eli. He proposed that haplography occurred, perhaps in a text that had Avimelech for Achimelech, like in 1 Chronicles 18:16. Thus, the text was originally Tzadok son of Achitub and Abiathar son of Abimelech. Tsumura writes that while the Masoretic text could be a scribal mistake, it is possible that the Achimelech is the name of Abiathar's son as well as that of Abiathar's father, since naming a son after his grandfather was a common practice. In this case, quote, Abiathar may have retired early in David's reign from his position as one of the chief priests in favor of a son, as Tzadok later did, in 1 Kings 4:2. And later, when the son died or had some other problems, Abiathar resumed the position, end quote. Likewise, Anderson writes, quote, there is no compelling reason why another Achitub could not have been the grandfather of Abiathar, end quote.
Okay, so there's more than one issue with this bit. Okay.
Yeah. On Seraya, in 2 Samuel 20:25, he is called Shia in Ketiv and Shva in Kerei. In 1 Kings 4:3, he is called Shisha, and in 1 Chronicles 18:16, he is called Shavsha. Anderson comments, Seraya is an Israelite name with a possible meaning Yahweh is prince, or Yahweh persisteth, while Shausha and its variants appear to be non-Semitic, according to McCarter, perhaps corruptions of an Egyptian title or office. It is possible that the many variants of the scribe's name or title may indicate its foreign origin, perhaps Egyptian, and that Seraya is only one of the attempts to transliterate the non-Israelite name or designation, end quote. Tsumura notes B. Mazar's opinion that the name might have been Hurrian, possibly Shewe Shari, which is known from Nuzi documents.
So you're saying rather than it being a personal name, it's possible that the job title of Sofer was recorded somewhere as being this other name, and they thought it was a personal name, but it probably was a foreign word that meant the same thing.
Perhaps.
Yeah, interesting.
On verse 18, Benaiah son of Yehoiada was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites. The Hebrew Bible reads, and Benaiah son of Yehoiada and the Kerethites and the... Yeah, but the English is Benaiah. So
yeah, but you just said the
that.
Hebrew reads.
Yeah, but Hebrew Bible reads,
Okay.
Yeah, but, you're right. Benaiah was son of Yehoiada and the Kerethites and the Pelethites. According to 1 Chronicles 18:17, Benaiah was over or in charge of the Kerethites and Pelethites. This reading is attested by most early translations, but the Septuagint reads, Benaiah was counselor and Kelethite and Pelethite. Most commentators generally identify these groups as part of the Sea people. The Kerethites are often identified as the Cretans, but the Pelethites' identity is unclear. Some, like Herzberg, identified them with the Philistines, with Palti being a shortened form of Plishti, though this is rejected by McCarter as unlikely. Auld notes Van Setters's identification of these people as Greek mercenaries, Cretan archers, and lightly armed peltasts, i.e. troops armed with a light shield or pelte. Similarly, Targum reads, Benaiah was appointed over the archers and over the slingers. Chazal in Talmud Sanhedrin 16b identified them as the Urim and Thummim because they are decisive, kotin, their pronouncements, and their actions were wondrous, mufla'in. According to Talmud Berachot 4a, these refer to the Sanhedrin with Benaiah as its head. Yeah. And finally, on David's sons were priests. This statement is surprising since the priesthood was hereditary, available only to Aaron's descendants, which David's sons were not. McCarter notes Rowley's opinion that the statement implies that in David's time, quote, the priesthood was not yet regarded as hereditary or as limited to the tribe of Levi, end quote. Instead of priests, Septuagint has chiefs of the court, Vulgate has princes, Peshitta has nobles and Targum has teachers or commanders. Most traditional commentators follow the Targum, reading rulers or governors. 1 Chronicles 18:17 describes David's sons as chief officers, in Hebrew Harishonim, next to the king, a reading reflected by Josephus in Antiquity 7:110. Anderson writes that the reason for these changes may have been the wish to avoid the implication that there could have been legitimate non-Levitical priests. McCarter writes that in the time of David and Solomon, there were special priests assigned to the royal household, and members of the royal family might serve in this capacity. He suggested that the original meaning was sochnim, administrators of the royal estate. Likewise, Tsumura writes that if the term kohanim does mean priests, they may have been chaplains for the rituals carried out in the royal family. And I have only one Christian for this chapter, and that is Cassiodorus, who lived in the 6th century BC. He writes that David's wars after... Not BC, 6th century CE, sorry. David's wars after ascending to the throne prefigure the Savior's victories over pagans and the faithless.
Those are not the same types of victories.
Oh, and there is an interesting comment by Jerome, who lived in the 4th and 5th centuries. The measuring out of lines of Moabites, some for death and some for life, is understood in the persons of Orpah and Ruth, who represent the diverging paths of idolatry and true faith.
What?
Yeah.
That's awful. Fuck off,
What's
Jerome.
the connection? What's the connection?
No,
What's the
no,
ropes
just
got to do
shut the
with
fuck up, Jerome.
Yeah, he writes the significance of setting aside some Moabites for life and others for death is made clear by the story of Orpah and Ruth.
Oh,
Orpah-
okay.
yeah,
They're
Orpah-
Moabites. Okay.
Yeah, Orpah, who turned back to idolatry and her ancient country, was destined for death. Ruth, following her mother-in-law, whose name means pleasant, says, "Your people shall be my people, and your God my God." This is from Homilies on the Psalms, alternative series 61 on Psalms 15.
Jerome is notably terrible at a lot of things.
I guess. Yeah, I'm done.
All right, so we can move on to chapter 9 then.
Yes.
I suppose I can read this one.
Yeah, sure.
All right. David asked, "Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and he was summoned to David. The king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "At your service." The king said, "Is there anyone remaining of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of David? The kindness of God?" Ziba said to the king, "There remains a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet." Oh yeah, that's right, the one that we all forgot about.
Mephibosheth.
Yeah. The king said to him, "Where is he?" Ziba said to the king, "He is in the house of Makir, son of Amiel, at Lodebar." Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Makir, son of Amiel, at Lodebar. Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face, probably because he can't walk, and did obeisance.
Oh, you ableist.
That was insensitive.
David said, "Mephibosheth." He answered, "I am your servant." David said to him, "Do not be afraid, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you yourself shall eat at my table always." He did obeisance and said, "What is your servant, that you should look upon a dead dog such as I?" Then okay, that's interesting. The dead dog thing. I'll get back to
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it is.
I'll
in
get back
First
to it.
Samuel.
I'll get
yeah.
back to it. Yeah.
Yeah, David called
Then
himself that.
the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce. so that your master's grandson may have food to eat. But your master's grandson, Mephibosheth, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do. Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, or Micah. And all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he always ate at the king's table. Now he was lame in both his feet. So this, of course, ties into that story that we heard about the was it like the caretaker that dropped him or something while running away. So, in that there's also the reference here to the what is your servant that you should look upon a dead dog such as I, which is very interesting because we saw the imagery of like was it like a dog's head being cut off or something like that.
David says about himself something like that to Saul, no?
Yeah, and in 1 Samuel 24:15.
24:15. Okay. So because of that link, I could totally see that being like those two sections as being part of an independent strand, and it is quite interesting, right? But still, we have here the once again we're moving back to like respecting Saul's line, but having it like still under David. So yeah, it is interesting. Another instance of legitimation, but specifically for this one family line.
I mean, the story is trying to make him look like he's different from other kings. He shows kindness to the king that he overthrew, his grandson or whatnot.
Sure, yeah.
Definitely doesn't read like I didn't it wasn't me that broke his legs and forced him to live under hostage in the city with me.
Right, so we gotta show some kindness, yeah.
Okay, I'll start on the commentary. First on verse 1. McCarter and Anderson note Viola's opinion that verse 1 is an editorial addition, since it anticipates verse 3. Tsumura, however, writes that the construction Vayomer, and he said, plus subject, often introduces a new episode, marking a setting for a subsequent event, as in other biblical passages, such as Genesis 7:1, 12:1, Exodus 12:1, Numbers 26:1, etc. On Tziva, Hebrew Tziva, the name seems to be non-Israelite. Kimchi wrote that Tziva was a Canaanite slave. Shmuel Vagon notes Moshe Tzvi Segal's opinion that the name Tziva is a shortened form of Tzivael or Tziviyau. Knox derived the name from the Aramaic Tziva, which means branch or twig, according to Halot. In verse 9, he is called Saul's steward, in Hebrew Nar, as we'll later see. Anderson comments, Tziva must have been in charge of Saul's estate, although it is not made clear to whom the patrimony now belonged. It is likely that it had become crown property. David apparently had the right to restore it to Mephibosheth. If so, Mephibosheth had no more claim upon it because the paternal estate had become part of the crown lands. See also 1 Samuel 8:14 and 22:7. On verse 4, Machir, son of Amiel, McCarter comments, the name has a good pedigree in northern Gilead. In the 12th century BCE, Machir seems to have been a tribe occupying the territory between Ephraim and Zebulun, Judges 5:14, which in the developed biblical tradition belonged to Manasseh. Eventually, Manasseh was originally a clan of Machir that grew powerful and displaced it, or possibly a rival tribe that drove Machir away. In any case, the Machirites came to be thought of as a clan of Manasseh in Numbers 26:29, and in the biblical genealogies, Machir is a son of Manasseh, which is Genesis 50:23, etc., and the father of Gilead in Numbers 26:29. In this final arrangement, the territory of Machir was that part of Gilead said to have been given them by Moses. as we see in Numbers 32 verses 39 and 40 and Deuteronomy 3:15, specifically the territory between Machanaim and the Yarmuk, but also including, at least in theory, Bashan. Compare Joshua 13:29-31 and 17:1. This was the vicinity in which Abiner and Ishbaal established a rump government after Saul's death, and it must have maintained a fierce loyalty to the house of Saul. Our Machir is likely to have shared this sentiment, and it is not surprising to find him harboring the Saulite Skion Meribaal. Nevertheless, Machir... S-C-I-O-N.
I think is it pronounced Sion? I think this is something that I mispronounced a few episodes ago. And then Lawrence corrected me.
Sion.
Yeah, not Sion, Sion.
Sion. Yeah. Nevertheless, Machir would eventually become a supporter of David in 1727. On Lo Devar, commentators generally take Lo Devar to be a northern Transjordanian city, located near Machanaim. McCarter suggested the modern et Dabal, around 15 kilometers northeast of Beth Sha'an, as a possible location. Tsumura notes that other identifications for the city have been suggested, but none are decisive.
It's a weird name, no?
Kinda. Lodavar, like without a thing.
2 words, and it could mean like to him a thing, like.
Yeah, though it's like. Okay.
It also sounds like law as in no, like Lodavar, like no thing, nothing.
I go drinking at Lodabar every night.
Shut up. So on verse 7, I will restore you all the land that belonged to your grandfather's
Saul. A load bar is actually another loading bar I used to go to. It's a gaming bar in my area.
Yeah. McCarter writes that we can assume that David took control over Saul's property in Benjamin and elsewhere after the demise of Ishbosheth. Tsumura notes C.H. Gordon's observation that David recognized the right of Saul's grandson to Saul's estate. He compared it with the situation in Odyssey 1 sections 394 to 404, where, quote, Odysseus' son admits that though others might have the right to the kingship of Ithaca, he insists that he at least had the right to his father's house and slaves, end quote.
I love how you said Ithaca.
Because Ithaca.
I think in English people say Ithaca. Right?
Yeah, they say Ithaca.
Right? Ithaca, yeah.
Ithaca. What do you want me to do, huh?
I know, it's just fun. I'm not making fun of you. I like it.
Yeah. It is Ithaca in Greek at least. Okay. You will always eat at my table. Anderson comments, it was a mark of special honor to eat at the king's table. Compare 1 Samuel 2:8. But it is less certain whether this royal patronage meant that Mephibosheth shared the king's personal table, as we see in 1 Samuel 25:18 and 17, and 1 Kings 5:7, which is 4:27 in the Old Testament, or whether he had his own establishment in Jerusalem. Compare 2 Samuel 16:3. It may well be that the two alternatives are really complementary, although if our reading of verse 10 is right, then the former alternative is more likely. Now, for a dead dog, I say this term also appears in 1 Samuel 24:15, so you can check that out. On verse 9, Tzibah Saul's steward. Hebrew for steward is Na'al. Anderson notes that this word can mean young man, servant, or squire. He writes that since Tzibah is no longer a youth in verse 19 and had been in charge of Saul's estate, it seems preferable to read Na'al as steward here. On verse 10, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. Bar-Efrat notes that this phrase contradicts what is said later in this verse. Quote, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. End quote. He writes that this contradiction can be resolved by assuming that Mephibosheth will not eat at all of his meals on the king's table, but only the official or ceremonial feasts, as we see in 1 Samuel 20, verses 18 and 27. The Lucianic recension reads, so that your master's household be provided for, reading lebait instead of leben. Bar-Efrat writes that this resolves the problem by emphasizing the difference between Mephibosheth's family, who are not eating at the king's table, and Mephibosheth himself, who does. This reading is favored by McCarter and Anderson, with the latter writing that this reading is preferable since a separate provision had already been made for Mephibosheth in verse 7. Tsumura, however, notes Riney's opinion that the Masoretic text presents, quote, an administrative system under which royal courtiers were supported by income from their estates, end quote. He writes, quote, when the Masoretic text makes good sense, both linguistically and from the social custom, it is unnecessary to amend it based on Septuagint, end quote.
Sorry, the verse I was thinking of earlier was 2 Samuel 3:8. The one that was really weird. Yeah. The words of Ishbaal made Abner very angry. He said, "Am I a dog's head for Judah?" That was the one I was thinking of. But yeah, you're right. Also in 1 Samuel 24:14.
Now on that same verse, Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. This information is repeated in 1918. McCarter and Anderson take this phrase to be a gloss, with the former writing that it is, quote, disruptive and unnecessary at this point, end quote, though it is found in all Arab translations. On verse 11...
I wonder if the word nar is used to imply this is a servant, a free servant, what's the word? A freeborn servant as opposed to a slave. If that makes sense. Like a nar is a paid servant, and a Oved is a slave, an unpaid servant.
I mean, now it can mean it now can mean a lot of things.
Yeah. I'm just saying. Yeah. Oh no, but then again, the word nar is used for Oved as well in with the story of Abraham. It refers to. I guess it's not specific.
Okay, on verse 11, Mephibosheth ate at David's table. The Hebrew Bible reads, and Mephibosheth eats at my table. The text implies that Ziba said this, a reading accepted by Kimchi, Ibn Kaspi, and Abravanel. Rashi and Ditrani, however, wrote that David said this. Bar-Efrat wrote that while David is the speaker, the text should have mentioned it, and David already said this to Ziba. Septuagint reads, and Mephibosheth used to eat at David's table, with the narrator speaking. This reading is preferred by McCarter and Anderson, with the former writing that the Masoretic text reading is influenced from verses 7 and 10. Tsumura, however, writes that the Hebrew achal means quote, is going to eat. Sorry, echol. Yeah, it is. Where is it?
It doesn't say that.
Sorry, no, Hebrew ochel.
Yeah.
He writes that the Hebrew ochel means is going to eat, and al shulchani means at my table. This indicates that the entire section should be taken as a dialogue. David said to Ziba in verse 9, then Ziba said to David in verse 11a, and David said to Ziba in verse 11b. Hence, the phrase, and he said, should be supplied after Ziba's speech. The Peshitta and the Lusanic recension read, the king's table, anticipating verse 13. And finally, on verse 12, Mephibosheth had a young son named Mikra, or Micha. Bar-Efrat wrote that this detail's significance is apparent considering Jonathan's words to David in 1 Samuel 20:15, quote, you shall never discontinue your faithfulness to my house, end quote. According to 1 Chronicles 8, verses 33 to 40, Saul's house continued to exist because of Micha.
Does he come up again in the story?
Yeah. No, not in the story, no, but it comes up again in 1 Chronicles.
Right.
And
this name is spelt the same as the prophet Micah.
Yeah, I guess.
Is it the same spelling?
I think it's a hey with not an aleph.
Yeah? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And
the Christian commentary is, hey,
no.
This is all about Jesus somehow.
Actually, there isn't. There isn't any Christian commentators.
But that's what the comments would be.
Okay, so who wants to let's play a game? Who we're gonna make up a Christian commentary for this?
Wait,
chapter.
hold on. No, I got it. Okay. You see, this is the Jesus is always healing the sick, right? And even people who are generally seen as lower on the social scale, he treats well, in relatively speaking. So this is prefiguring Christ's good deeds for the disabled and their entrance into the kingdom of God. Got him.
Well,
Okay.
actually,
But
the
they keep.
the link that Isaac sent us earlier on these Christian prophecies, 2 Samuel 7 actually has a prophecy on David's seed, and his kingdom is everlasting, and the prophecy on the Son of God, and David's house being established forever. Funny, we don't have anything after that.
Yeah, it was like, let's make a little prophecy. Let's put a bunch of stuff in one chapter, and then we're just gonna.
Well, he probably never heard of Cassiodorus.
According to the list, the next prophecy is in 2 Kings. So they're like, God was like, oh, we don't need any more prophecies about Jesus. This was enough.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to move on to 2 Samuel 10?
I am.
All right.
I think so. I mean, it's not the commentary.
wait.
My commentary is not long, and
Okay.
I should
Okay,
note
okay.
11 through 13 are big. Like,
Yeah, I was gonna
seriously,
say, I
11,
think
12,
Lilith
13
wants to
are-
be here for chapter 11.
Yeah, so I
So we'll
suggest we
do 10, and we'll leave it there for the day.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me see if I can get through this one. I am not trying to say these names incorrectly to be funny. I'm just having difficulty saying these names. I'm trying to get over that. So, sometime afterward, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun succeeded him. David said, I will deal loyally with Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father dealt loyally with me. So David sent envoys to console him concerning his father. When David's envoys came into the land of the Ammonites, the princes of the Ammonites said to Lord Hanun, do you really think that David is honoring your father just because he has sent messengers with condolences to you? Has not David sent his envoys to you to search the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it? So Hanun seized David's envoys, shaved off half the beard of each, cut off their garments in the middle at their waists, and sent them away.
Well, that's a bad translation.
Mhm.
My translation has
What does it
cut
really
away half
say
of
when
their.
it says shave off half their beard?
It says clipped off, one side of their beards and cut away half of their garments at the buttocks.
At the buttocks.
Yeah. I mean, the
Not
Hebrew.
in the
it's
middle
a-
of their waists.
No, that's
I mean,
just, your one is too Christian, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
they can't say but.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah,
got
they can't
the
say
spose
but
of the
like
donkey donk.
I think it's still the same place
Yeah,
though.
Yeah.
Okay. And when David was told, he sent to meet them, for the men were greatly ashamed. I wonder why. At least you could tell they were all Jewish. The king said, remain at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return. When the Ammonites saw that they had become odious to David, the Ammonites sent and hired the Arameans of Beth Rehob and the Arameans of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers, as well as the king of Makkah, 1,000 men, and the men of Tob, 12,000 men. When David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the army of the warriors. The Ammonites came out and drew up in battle array at the entrance of the gate, but the Arameans of Zobah and of Rehob and the men of Tob and Makkah were by themselves in the open country. When Joab saw that the battle was set against him both in front and in the rear, he chose some of the picked men of Israel and arrayed them against the Arameans. The rest of the troops he put in charge of his brother Abishai, and he arrayed them against the Ammonites. He said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come help you. Be strong, and let us be courageous for the sake of our people and for our cities and for our God. and may the Lord do what seems good to him. So Joab and the people who were with him moved forward into battle against the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites saw that the Arameans fled, they likewise fled before Abishai and entered the city. Then Joab returned from fighting against the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. But when the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they gathered themselves together. Hadadezer sent and brought out the Arameans who were beyond the river, and they came to Helam with Shobach and the commander of the army of Hadadezer at their head. When it was told David, he gathered all Israel together and crossed the Jordan and came to Helam. The Arameans arrayed themselves against David and fought with him. The Arameans fled before Israel, and David killed the Arameans, 700 chariot teams and 40,000 horsemen, and wounded Shobach and the commander of their army, so that he died there. When all the kings who were servants of Hadadezer saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became subject to them. So the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore.
That's really interesting. So the word in the last verse that you translated as, that your translation has, they made peace, is vayishlimu, and the shalom, like the peace, is in there as well. But just like Islam doesn't mean peace, it means submitted. I think over here as well, yashlimu is not the sense of peace, but the sense of submission. It's interesting that your translation has they made peace rather than that they submitted to him, to Israel.
Yeah, when Mark was reading the first one, I hadn't switched mine to this updated translation. I was still going with for whatever reason it defaulted to the King James, and it was amusing seeing how wildly different the King James was from what he was reading.
Yeah.
I can only imagine going through the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if the Hebrew word can mean submitted, but I wonder if it seems very similar in that sense, like Islam, shalom, or salam and Islam.
Yeah, salam would be the closest one.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Although it is interesting here. So the thing is, we're talking about the Ammonites and the Arameans, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, in chapter 8, he already fucking devastated them.
Yeah, and Hadadezer is the same king, right? And so it's...
Yeah, how many times can you defeat these people? I mean...
As many times as you want.
Hamstringed all their horses, all that shit. It's just like the Book of Mormon all over again.
Yeah, and also like is Hadadezer now an Aramean? Because he's fighting with them. Many editions read Hadarezer. Okay. Yeah, it says the Arameans saw they had been routed. They regrouped their forces. And then they, which kind of means like, oh, now he's going to attack the Arameans in their hometown, sort of thing, because they helped the Ammonites. And then it's like, then we suddenly get Hadadezer again, and he's getting Arameans from across the Euphrates, which is also similar to what we had before with, David went out and defeated Hadadezer when he was going to the Euphrates. So yeah, it does definitely reads like, and also this chapter is very in depth, and it talks about military tactics, and the last chapter was all about like everything happens really, not last chapter, the chapter before, sorry, chapter 8. There it's like very quick, as you said, it's like it's just like numbers and cities and blah blah blah, like it's not in depth or anything. So very 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 obviously not written by the same stylistic school or authorship or whatever.
Yeah, my commentary is short here. It's only 3 pages.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so in verse 2, just as his father showed kindness to me. Traditional commentators like Rashi, Kinchi, and Ditrani, following Midrash Tanchuma Vayere 25, wrote that the Moabite king killed his father, mother, and brothers, except for one who fled to the Ammonites who were ruled by Nachash. Modern commentators note that Nachash was Saul's enemy in 1 Samuel 11, and so David might have allied with Nachash against Saul, their common enemy. McCarter proposed that the kindness, quote-unquote, refers to 1712, where Shobi, son of Nachash, provided David when he was fighting against Absalom. Tsumura, however, rejects this, since it is not explicitly told, and such an interpretation, quote, would certainly be completely at odds with the general understanding that Absalom's rebellion was long after the Ammon War, end quote.
Oh, I see. It's trying to say that this story with David fighting in these places is happened after like the more localized stories with his son Absalom. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now on verse 3, overthrow it. In Hebrew, lehafcha. Is the lehofcha. From the root.
Also, Aaron Aaron probably would like to know. Nahash means snake.
Yeah, Nachash means snake. In Hebrew, it's lehofcha, from the root hey pei chaf, to turn over. While the meaning overthrow it is attested by Vulgate and Peshitta, Septuagint and Targum read survey or evaluate it. Kimchi explains, quote, he who examines something carefully turns it over from side to side, end quote. Likewise, McCarter notes Ehrlich's opinion that the verb hafach with the meaning of overthrow is elsewhere only with Yahweh as subject. Thus, the verb hafach is synonymous with the preceding chakol, which means explore, and veleraglea, which means to spy it out. Anderson writes that this reading is possible, especially in the light of the changed verbal sequence in 1 Chronicles 19:3.
On what you just mentioned, Isaac, it is kind of interesting that Nahash would mean snake because Naga is a variation of snake, and Najash is also a variation.
So I think Najash comes from the Hebrew thing, but I don't know if there's any connection to Naga, like.
Well, they're all very similar words, and they all refer to snakes. So I thought that I actually thought that Najash was the pronunciation for Sanskrit, because all the Indian cobras have Najash as their or I've seen that name associated with Indian cobras. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. On verse 4, shaved off half of each man's beard, cut off their garment at the buttocks. These acts intend to humiliate the courtiers. Anderson writes that adult Israelites wore a full beard, and it was a mark of one's manhood. He notes Driver's opinion that half of a beard refers not to the length of the beard, but to one entire side. Septuagint has them shaving all their beards, and is also implied in 1 Chronicles 19:4. McCarter suggests that together with the cutting of their garments at the buttocks, there is a symbolic castration at play, which is, quote, a peculiarly appropriate punishment for presumed spies in view of the widespread analog of eyeballs and testicles in myth and folklore, end quote. Auld comments, quote, the shame they experience is probably caused quite as much by the failure of their mission, compare Jeremiah 14:3, as by their physical appearance. The one is powerfully symbolic of the other, end quote.
Okay, I quickly looked it up. Najash for the fossil is from Argentina, so it's Spanish Nahash, which is just Hebrew.
I looked it up too. Right. As I was reading the same thing as you were.
And interestingly enough, Naga in Sanskrit and Naga or Naja, the Indian cobra, is etymologically the same as the English word snake. Snake, snack, knack, nag, naga.
Okay, that went a different direction than I thought.
That's just the snack bit of the snake is the where the naga comes from. And there's another word in Sanskrit that is sarpa, which is very similar to serpent.
All right, thanks for that. I've got a comment from Matt White who says, Isaac Raskin, French pays, Latin pach, German ruch, Hawaiian aloha, Russian mir may have cognates with the languages word for word /country/countryside away from cities.
Huh? Oh, the word for peace, maybe?
With because Russian mir means world.
Yeah.
Ah. Languages. So you're saying that the word for peace and country are connected? That's interesting.
Okay, I'll continue on verses 6 through 8. First Chronicles attests to a longer reading, and I'm reading from the JPS version. Quote, the Ammonites realized that they had incurred the wrath of David. So Hanun and the Ammonites sent 1,000 silver talents to hire chariots and horsemen from Aram Naharaim, Aram Ma'acha, and Tzova. They hired 32,000 chariots, Medeba, Mule A. And Auld comments, First Chronicles 19 gives us access to an earlier draft of this chapter in two quite different ways, both its context and its actual text. Readers of this episode in First Chronicles 19, as within the earlier and shorter Book of Two Houses, meet it immediately after First Chronicles 18, which corresponds to 2 Samuel 8. And in several respects, the chronicler's wording appears more reliable. Verses 6 through 7 are the only portion of the chapter extant in 4Q Samuel A. This is one of the portions of Samuel in which 4Q Samuel A and Chronicles attest a longer and apparently better text of Samuel. On verse 12, the cities of our God. Auld notes that cities of our God is unique in the Hebrew Bible, with the singular city of our God found only in Psalms 48 verses 2 and 8, referring to Jerusalem. He also notes that defining the people of Israel by its cities is unusual in the Hebrew Bible. Anderson writes that these may refer to Israelite cities in general, or more likely to those of southern Transjordan, which would be in more immediate danger. While the reading cities of our God is attested in all other translations, like Vulgate reading the singular form, McCarter notes several emendations offered for the text. Quote, delete array, cities, as a corrupt didograph of the last two letters of the preceding be'ad, for the sake of, according to Schultz and Herzberg. 2. Read Aron Elohenu, the Ark of our God, according to Klosterman, Bud, Smith, etc. 3. Read Arei Elohenu, Aleph replacing Ein, the altars of our God. And 4. Read Avdei Elohenu, the servants of our God, according to Ehrlich. On verse 16, Chelam. The exact location of Chelam is unknown. According to verse 17, it resided in Transjordan. Anderson suggested that it may well be a region in northern Transjordan. Tsumura notes that one possible identification is the town of Alema, modern Alma, located about halfway between Rabbah and Damascus. McCarter notes Thenius' understanding of Chelam to mean their armies. He rejects this meaning based on early translations and it being taken as a noun in verse 17.
Proof for the Book of Mormon right there.
Shut up. On verse 18, David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. Hebrew Bible reads 700 charioteers, rechev, and 40,000 horsemen, parashim. Though this reading is attested in the Septuagint and Vulgate and Targum, 1 Chronicles 19:18 and Josephus in Antiquity 7:1-8 read 7,000 charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers. Kimchi explained the discrepancy by claiming that the 700 charioteers were chosen out of 7,000 charioteers in total. Peshitta reads 700 charioteers, or 1,700 according to McCarter and Anderson, and 4,000 horsemen and many people. The Lusanic recension has 700 charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers. Anderson writes that it is highly doubtful that the Arameans would have such a high number of horsemen, and thus foot soldiers may be the more plausible reading.
Yeah, there's probably some overlap with like the very similar verse in another chapter, right? 1,700 versus 700, blah blah blah. So maybe they got confused with each other as well.
Yeah. And finally, on verse 19, they made peace with the Israelites and became subject to them. Anderson comments, Malamat believes that, quote, David took over Hadad Ezer's realm not only territorially, but also structurally, end quote. However, other scholars, for example Miller and Hayes, are more skeptical of such a total incorporation. Clearly, the Aramean political power was considerably reduced, and they may well have paid tribute to David. But it is less certain that, quote, all of southern and central Syria was embraced in the empire, apparently under provincial administration, end quote, according to John Bright. And no ancient Christians. No, they don't like these chapters.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to be doing next week. We'll be doing 2 Samuel 11.
Yes.
Like 11, 12, 13. You said they're big. Are we
big? Yeah.
Yeah. So are we going to? You think we're going to be able to do all three in the same day?
I don't know if we'll do all three. Maybe we'll do like 2, but who knows? But like 11 and 12 are connected. I'll give that.
Okay.
They both are like related to Bathsheba, like in David, which scholars take this as David raping Bathsheba, and so it's very big.
Oh, you mean Bathsheba?
Yeah, but Bathsheba, but it's Bathsheba. Yeah. And in 12, it's Nathan's parable, and
so that must be why she's called Bathsheba.
Yeah, shut up. And 12, which is Nathan's parable, and
but there is a Hebrew liquid unit of measurement which is called a bath.
Maybe.
Speaking of liquid measurement, a friend of mine who owns a brewery said that if I came out there today, that he would pay my tab.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah. So I said, okay, I'll twist my arm.
Sure.
So we can get a look for him announcing his bankruptcy, Arn. Just wondering.
All right, so that's where I'll be going as soon as we hang up. All right, so anybody got any closing comments?
Yes, absolutely. You gotta join that Discord. That because Peter's such a good guy, he's definitely sharing that link. And if you haven't already, you can go ahead and watch a very long video about flat Earth and the Bible.
I'm very impressed by that, by the way. I like the humor that you keep cutting into it.
Yeah, I kind of have to, especially for something long like that. Also, it's fun just like including wrestling jokes all the time. I feel like I'm definitely going to do that in the future.
Yeah,
it's like
Lawrence, and if they don't do what you just said, they can also subscribe to Mark's channel, which I just posted in the chat too.
Absolutely, good idea.
See?
What were you saying, Isaac?
I forgot. Don't worry about it.
Ha ha ha.
All right. See you guys next week. Well, I guess next month, aren't we? Yeah, next month, October.
Yeah.
Kinda, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah.
What date is it?
5th.
A week from today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just...
All right. Good night, all.
Bye.